She's head of commercial services and digital transformation up there. And she has this great line she always throws at her staff. Do not ever tell me that's what the AI said. You're the one making the judgment. You're responsible for what it is, right? And that's the governance and control processes you put in place. Yeah, use AI, but you're responsible for what it comes out with. So if you get that wrong, that's on you, right? That's on you, not on the AI. Don't say the model was wrong. The IT told me to do it. No, you're the one with the responsibility. The buck stops with you. Now, sometimes you'll automate processes, but I get really nervous with automating processes that require nuance and context, and it's like standardization in general. And I've seen a lot of attempts to standardize things and centralize functions go very wrong. And we had an executive in residence at Melbourne about a decade ago, Brett Ritz, who was vice president for external reporting at BHP Billiton at the time and previously been a partner at EY. And he said to us about centralisation, because we were in the middle of doing a centralisation process, said, having centralised, decentralised and then re-centralised, his learning was you only centralise functions that don't require a brain.
Welcome to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, the podcast for anyone trying to make sense of intelligent machines, messy politics and everything in between. But don't panic. Today, I stopped to give a ride to Professor Michael Davern. Michael is the Professor of Accounting and Business Information Systems at the prestigious University of Melbourne. The University of Melbourne is consistently ranked as the #1 university in Australia and a top-tier institution globally, positioned as 19th in the 2026 World University Rankings. Also, I went to Melbourne University and I did my Masters there, and I'd like to give a shout out to Peter Seddon, who's now retired. If you're listening, Peter, g'day to you. Thank you so much for everything you taught me. So Michael is at the forefront of accounting and business information systems research, working directly with industry on a number of projects, guiding a cohort of PhD students, a member of the CPA Reporting and Assurance Centre of Excellence, and co-editor of the Australasian Journal for Information Systems. G'day, Michael.
G'day, great to be here.
Thank you for joining us today, mate. First question for you is, you've got a lot going on there. When do you actually get time to sleep?
There's a function of being ADHD and finding so many things interesting and not good at saying no. So sleep sort of becomes a bit optional, and I have to constantly remind myself that you work to live, you don't live to work. But there's so much of what I'm doing at the moment is fun and exciting, and I'm still learning, which is great at this stage of my career, to still have all that stuff going on and working with bright minds and trying to change the world. That's great stuff. Yeah.
Well, it feels like it feels to me like it actually isn't work for you.
There's always elements of any job you don't like, but the opportunity to play with ideas, to play with bright people, and to make the world a better place through research and teaching and engaging with industry to make sure that what we're working on actually changes the world rather than just sits in, ivory tower. That's not the way, certainly I see universities working the way we're operating now. So yeah, it's great.
So what's your favourite memory from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
My biggest problem here was too many favourites along the way and too many quotes to draw from. But I think the most appropriate, given that we're talking about AI and AI governance, is the quote relating to deep thought, that the problem is that you never actually know what the question is, which is what the response was about 42 as being the answer to the question of life, the universe and everything. We didn't really know what the question was. And I think so often that's the problem, where we present answers and solutions when we really don't know what the question was that we were asking and what the issues are, and thinking about that. I think the other one I'd go for is just the answer 42, because if we think in the AI world, so often we get answers to things now that are not necessarily interpretable. So what does 42 actually mean? And yeah.
Well, you brought up a good point, because Dr. Karl always talks about the people who win Nobel Prizes, it's because they've asked the right question.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's the hard part. It's the hard part. And certainly everything I've ever done with my PhD students and research students is we're going to spend most of the time at the start defining what the question is. It's not Just grab a question off the shelf.
Yeah. And the question I come across most when I work with organizations is, what is it? What is the problem that you're actually trying to solve?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
quite often it's not the first thing they tell me. It's a deeper problem or a more complicated scenario behind that.
Yeah, so when I go out into organizations, I'm often asking them, what are your hard problems? All right. I want their hard problems because I know the solution doesn't lie in day-to-day practice. So the broader research perspective I can bring gives some insight to that. But it is working through to define and develop insights about that rather than looking for solutions, because hard problems don't have solutions. What you
Mm,
put in place is a process that leads over time to their resolution through the insights that you develop. And I think too often we find consultants and others selling solutions, and a lot of tech companies sell solutions. What's the problem in the first place,
mm,
and then how it contextualizes into that
mm.
particular organization, because every organization I've ever gone to, they're all different, even in the same industry. They've all got different quirks, and sometimes they're doing some things that are incredibly sophisticated. Then you walk into the office next door, and you go, "Oh my God, did I just get in a time machine and go back to the 1800s? Why are we still doing it this way? And
Mm.
why is this process functioning that way?" Well, that's the way we've always done it. And it was like,
Well,
yeah,
Peter Seton really had a really good way of describing that. In ERP systems, it was called functional fit. So you would have on the side of the vendor, you would have all this capability, and then on your side as the client, you had all these things you needed to get done. And the degree which the functional fit matched what you needed to get done would give you a score to how close the ERP system actually met your
yeah.
requirements.
Well, with ERP system, that's also because when you buy the system, you're buying the business process. So if it doesn't fit, you're going to have problems.
Exactly. Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
Being in an organization that just updated its ERP system after 20 years, yeah, let's just say that's been a not so pleasant experience.
Yeah, well, I suppose one of the questions is not to ask you how is workday going, so we'll move on. So when I was growing up, the only professor that I knew was the professor from Gilligan's Island.
Yep.
So when did you realise or get the spark that you wanted to be a professor? And just in a few bullet points, how did you get there?
So, undergraduate background was accounting, finance, and computer science. So I'd sort of been spanning the world that I've been spanning. Went out working for what was then Price Waterhouse, and ended up doing some tutoring at the University of Melbourne part time while I was doing that. And was very interested in what was then known as information systems, and met this individual called Peter Seddon, actually. Peter said and said to me, "Hey, if you're interested in this stuff, you should go to the University of Minnesota and do a PhD in information systems." And that's what I ended up doing. I mean, I found the research fascinating. I found that the discipline is one where we are really trying to affect practice, and I think that's always important to me. So I started my PhD saying how to do good science and solve real world problems at the same time. And the other part of it was a good colleague who recently retired, Robert Moroney, said to me, "It's not whether you want to be an accountant for Price Waterhouse or an accountant for the University of Melbourne. It's whether you want to be an accountant or an educator." On the teaching side, I thought, well, that's a no-brainer as well, because enabling other people and equipping them is something I really enjoy, and that sense of making a difference in other people's lives. And so I ended up 18 months after I got married, taking my wife in 1993, we moved to Minnesota and ended up spending 10 years in the US. So 5 years doing the PhD at Minnesota, and then 5 years at New York University, Stern School of Business, living in the middle of Greenwich Village in
Wow.
the throngs of New York. Yeah.
Well, I've got a couple of things to draw on there. Minnesota's been in the news for all the wrong reasons in the last few years. So that's for another pod, right?
I think so.
And
It's a very
and
different place to what we went to.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So for now, you're in New York as well, and that's also probably a lot different to
Yeah.
the early because you would have been there during September 11, wouldn't you? That would
Yeah.
have been 2001.
Yeah, my
So
daughter was born 36 hours after the towers fell, so it was quite a
right,
tense
wow.
moment. But yeah, yeah.
Were
She's
both
born there,
children
yeah.
born there?
Both children born there, yeah. Yeah,
So then you came back,
yeah.
and then what got you onto the professor train?
Well,
Oh,
that's having done the PhD, that was the line, and so
Yeah.
research, teaching, industry engagement, balancing between all those three, and doing lots of exciting projects, and the opportunity to span boundaries between the technology and the accounting and business world has always been fascinating to me. I think you'll learn a lot from sort of having a foot in both camps. And I think we still have the same problem that I saw right at the start of my career, is that sometimes technologists don't understand the business well enough, and sometimes the business people don't understand the technology well enough. And so that's where we fall in that great abyss in the middle sometimes, and there's problems. So the people who can create those connections understand the business implications of the technology and the uh, the way in which technology can help business. And the way I used to always describe this is every technology decision has a business impact. Every business problem has a technology component to it that will help you address and manage that problem. So yeah,
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. So you've got the business and the IT side
yeah,
disconnected, and the same problems we've had for 40 years because
yeah,
business information systems really kicked off in the
yeah,
70s, right?
yeah, yeah.
So how do you see AI solving that gap or bridging that gap or correcting for it?
In some respects, it makes it worse because we've now got a ubiquitous technology that is a black box for most people, and that's the scary
Mhm,
part. And that's
mhm,
what really worries me about how we are using AI. Since ChatGPT came on, everybody's talking AI. Well, I go back. I was teaching MBA students in the 1990s how to use neural networks to forecast the S&P 500. Right, so AI. I had a
mhm,
professor of AI on my PhD committee, so it's not a new area
mm.
for me.
For you?
But for a lot of people, I think they don't understand what it is and how it works, and they use the term AI to cover so many different technologies. And I worry that they don't understand particularly the non-deterministic nature of what it is, because we're used to thinking about things that come out of computers follow rules and are objective. These are not. They don't understand where the data comes into play. They don't understand the art that goes into the training and fine tuning of the models that we're using in AI. And, so when I see people starting to talk about what AI can do, my first question often is, have you ever trained a neural network? And if the answer is
Mm,
no, I said, well, then you really don't know what you're talking about, because you don't
mhm,
understand though the way in which there are judgments that you're going to make in the way you select the data and the way you train the data, the way you set the architecture up of what's going on, that will change its fit for the particular domain or problem that you're trying to deal with. And also then the challenges that creates with, overfitting to data, or the fact that the data may have errors and veracity problems with it, or that it doesn't fit the case that you're in. I mean, you mentioned 9/11. If you asked an AI tool on the morning of 9/11, what's the stock market going to do? It's going to get it wrong, because it hadn't seen something like that. But you ask any person on the street, what's the stock market going to do? They don't need finance knowledge to know it's going to tank, because
Mm,
these catastrophes just happened. So that's an extreme example, but I think there's also a lot of changing world that we live in, that sometimes the AI doesn't pick up on the unique things that are there. If you think about it, it's doing things probabilistically. So it's essentially like saying, let's take an average result, right? And who wants to employ someone who's average? Who wants
what?
the average response? And that's
Yeah.
that sort of leads me to sort of my two sort of rules of thumb that I have with the use of AI is, don't get AI to do something you don't know how to do yourself, because otherwise you can't evaluate the outputs, right? And the efficiency gains will most likely disappear as well, because you'll futz around, in Gen AI
Mm,
prompting things and in the wrong way. The other thing is, as we see AI get better and better and encroach more and more on what we do, it means that we need to think about, what are we doing as human beings that add value? So it increases our humanity in
mm,
living. And that can be things like relationships with customers, understanding deep, nuanced aspects of this specific context of what's going on and where we are and how this is unfolding, and giving meaning to it, right? AI is great at finding patterns in data, not so great at understanding the meaning in the patterns.
mm. The human judgment comes in.
That's the human judgment element. And
Mm,
so
mm.
that means you've got to think strategically about where you're deploying these tools, which is a governance and business process decision.
Well, I've got an analogy. As you were explaining that to me, the fact that you've got this great new technology that people don't know how to use it. It reminds me of a scenario where I want to get to Darwin and I've got this brand new mini miner and I'm going to follow a probabilistic map to
Mm,
get there, which means part of it will be on paved roads, part of it will be in the scrub. I'll be
hmm.
crossing rivers. I'll be driving for hours at a time. I've got to store extra fuel. Like it feels like these people are grabbing a nice shiny new toy and just driving it anywhere
Yeah.
without thinking about things you mentioned, like strategically, where do we use it? What processes are we replacing? Do I understand those processes well enough so that
Yeah.
I can educate the machine and also validate it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And look, the great liner here from some colleagues I've was on CPA's Centre of Excellence for Digital Transformation for the last 6 years, and that was being led by Stephanie Jablonska from BlueScope Steel. She's head of commercial services and digital transformation up there, and she has this great line she always throws at a staff: "Do not ever tell me that's what the AI said. You're the one making the judgment. You're responsible for what it is, right?" And that's the governance and control processes you put in place. Yeah, use AI, but you're responsible for what it comes out with. So if you get that wrong, that's on you, right? That's on you, not on the AI. Don't say the model was wrong. The IT told me to do it. No, you're the one that with the responsibility. The buck stops with you. Now, sometimes you'll automate processes, but I get really nervous with automating processes that require nuance and context, and it's like standardization in general. And I've seen a lot of attempts to standardize things and centralize functions go very wrong. And we had an executive in residence at Melbourne about a decade ago, Brett Ricks, who was vice president for external reporting at BHP Billiton at the time, and previously been a partner at EY. And he said to us about centralization, because we were in the middle of doing a centralization process, said, having centralized, decentralized, and then re-centralized, his learning was you only centralize functions that don't require a brain. And that, I think, as we look at AI automating things, becomes really important, because essentially it's saying if there is some really local knowledge, there's things that are contextually specific, be very careful about how you automate those, because you will lose the value add that's going in. So
Yeah.
it's that sort of 80-20 rule that we've seen a lot of, where you can probably take care of 80% of the cases, but then you get the human being focusing on the 20% where they can really add value and do the unique element, but you've still got to make sure the oversight is right. And so even creating tools where the AI is comfortable in saying, hey, look, this may not fit what's going on. I'm not sure about here. So getting it to express confidence levels. And this isn't new ideas. I mean, I've seen forecasting tools where, when things start to go outside the range of a confidence interval around a forecast, the tool starts to say, hey, you've got to get a human being to explain what's going to happen. I'm extrapolating from history and it doesn't seem to be generating something that's tracking with what I'm seeing going on. So something strange is happening. And that's where the storytelling and the meaning making comes into play.
So how do you take this new technology? From what you've said, is that we've got people who are novices in the sense they don't know how to implement these systems like traditional systems. We've had 40 years.
Yeah.
I understand how to put these in. So we've only had 4 months on these systems. So what do you see? What's the consequence of all of this? What are you gonna see? Are you gonna see more disasters or less disasters or failures? What do you think will
Uh,
happen as a
uh,
result?
we're already seeing some of those things
Yeah.
start to happen. I mean, some very embarrassing things from the likes of Deloitte being caught using AI, generating things that were in fictions.
Mm.
I mean, part of that's an education story, but part of it, you could sit there and say, well, let's create a whole lot of policies and lock down rules. That doesn't work, right? I've done stuff in the risk management space in large organizations, and the most ridiculous thing I came across was, yes, someone, senior executive, had to confess we did at one point have a policy about policies. And I sort of, that's going nuts. And so I think that then goes to building the right culture. And so that's a very human thing. And the culture is about creating awareness of the risks and thinking through that so that people are comfortable and confident that if they don't know, it is the right thing to ask and raise a flag saying, I'm not sure whether we should be doing this. Can someone elaborate on this? Because if you're in, you want that situation where I usually express it to people as, if you're the CEO and your staff is facing a situation, could be an AI related situation, could be any risk situation. There either isn't a policy or they don't know what the policy is. Can you sleep at night knowing that that's going on? right? Because that tells you whether you've got the right culture or not. Because if you've got the right culture, that person going to go, look, I don't know whether we can do this or not. I just don't feel right. So I'm going to have to sound out a little bit more before we go screaming ahead. Now, that gets really hard, I think, with the opacity of some of the technologies that we've had. But I think it's being open and having the discussion all the time about how you're doing this and how you're integrating these things into the workflows. And we're already picking up on some of those, and some of those you can control, like, you're installing, Copilot across your organization, explaining to people that this has enterprise level data security. So when you stick stuff in here, it's not going to be used to train the broader models. It's not going to be accessed. That's why we don't want you using ChatGPT or something else that you're doing, because we're keeping our data private and controlled in that sort of way. And I think that's really important, that people can see those differences in why you're rolling out the toolkits that you are, but also understanding that they should be asking questions and having that discussion about it to build that culture. I think the challenge is that this is moving so fast and it's transforming our work practices, that line about what you do versus what the AI does, and its strengths and the risks it exposes, is changing on a daily basis. I mean, we saw earlier this year the big hit that Salesforce and Workday and others took when agentic AI things started to explode. I don't know what the future of coding is, but I can code. I've been programming for 46 years was when I first started learning to program, but I don't write much code now, but when I do, I get AI's writing. I've just done some stuff, generated 1,500 lines of Python code. I wrote probably about 3 lines that I actually touched at that. The rest came out of AI generation and then AI validating it, and bang, it's working. Done. That even there makes me a little bit nervous. So I've got to make sure I can at least read the code, which I can, to see what's going on, and immerse yourself enough to know where those limits are. So there has to be some controlled experimentation as well to build that sense. It's kind of like driving a car. It's good to have some knowledge enough to empower you. Now, I couldn't fix a car if it broke down, but I did a small engines course when I was in high school, so I found out what a spark plug is, what a carburetor is, what a fuel injector does. So I got a sense that if the car's broken down, is it a flat battery, I'm out of gas, or is it something else? I got a bit of a rough idea of how much trouble I'm in if something goes wrong. And it's having that sense, I think, too, with AI, how far is too far? And that's a moving target. It's a judgment call as we think about how we change our workflows and processes. But saying no is not the way to go forward, because people will do it anyhow. And so it's also being open in the dialogue you're having about how that plays out.
And so recognizing that is a quite a deliberate, intentional journey of when you're implementing AI. It feels to me like you would have to do a lot more scrutiny than you would on a normal system implementation, because all of that thinking's been done for you in a
Yeah.
traditional system.
Yeah.
You're doing your functional fit, making sure it does what it needs to do. You're testing it. The data is migrated,
Yeah.
and then you test it and make sure that you're ready to go. So it feels a lot like there will be more failures of a bigger scale as a result of going down this path, just purely because it's harder to put that thing in and get that bit right. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's also the challenge that we see, and this is the one I'm really wrestling with. And I know stuff I'm doing with CPA Australia and firms, accounting firms and the like later in this year is trying to address some of this is, what do you do with a graduate, right? Because I know when I look at using the AI, okay, I have done this myself, so I know whether the AI is producing rubbish or not. I've got that, decades of experience in doing these things. What about the graduate who comes along and hasn't got the experience, hasn't got the discernment yet to be able to, you know what's right or wrong in terms of the AI, but the AI has automated this task? How do we equip them with what would have taken 3 or 4 years experience to be able to make those judgments about what's going on? And I think that's where we've got to be really careful. And the way in which we create professional development programs, the way in which we give them experience in an organization, and the roles that we create and the mentoring that we do, to build that culture, to help them to see that they're constantly learning and developing and to questioning it. So, I go back to Stephanie's comment about, don't tell me that the AI said that. You're the one that's responsible. that framing alone puts them, it's on you, not on the AI. So emphasizing those sort of things means that if it does go wrong, you're going to be held accountable, which then means that you're more likely to say, I'm not sure whether this is right. And present it at an earlier stage before you come. Here's the complete thing that I've done. I've got it done nice and fast because I used AI to do it, and I didn't tell anybody I used AI. No, that's not going to happen because you create the transparency, and that transparency in the usage and how you're doing that, I think, is where things become really crucial, because it's getting hard to determine the difference between what's coming out of AI and what a human being is generated, just on the surface level and then in the analytical.
The Turing test.
Yeah, and that's a losing race. I mean, I've been teaching some of our first year accounting students how to do some things with Gen AI, looking at financial ratios and company analysis. And even last year, when I was doing this, I had to fudge some of the AI outputs when I was trying to get them to discern the difference, because the AI was doing too well at some of what it was doing. But it was also doing some things that were dumb if you understood the context. And so getting them to ask the questions and getting them to go through that process of doing what the AI was doing at least once, so they then have a sense of what's wrong, what's right, what may be there, so they can ask questions of it much more.
It's interesting because on this podcast, I've got a lady in recruitment, Jacinta Will, and if you're listening, and I've spoken to Shane and John over there in Dublin, and there's a general sense that it's the older generation who will lead us through this change and lead through successfully, because they can see what's right and what's wrong. And
Yeah.
it's almost like the older generation is now taking back the tech from the younger generation and say, "Look, I know this. I've got this. We can make it happen." Well, all of them have talked about that on this podcast. What's your view on the older generation being the ones to lead the way?
I think we have to, because we're the ones that are in the position with the experience to know the limits of it when it falls over. And we're at that stage of being able to exercise that critical thinking in a context to great depth. If you look at the studies of expertise that psychologists and cognitive scientists have been doing for decades, what's really interesting over time, a novice is just buried with information. Oh, I can't make sense of it. There's too many things to pay attention to. As they get more experience, they focus down on a few things, but there's still a lot there. But then you go to someone who's expert in a field, and in any situation, there'll be only two or three things that they're paying attention to, right? Because they've learned, in this case, those are the only things that are really going to drive 90% of what's going on. The rest is just noise. And so that's what you sort of see this inverted U curve in how they use information. And that's what we bring. We know what is the two or three things that are really crucial to pay attention to, in the same way that the AI might be looking at 10 million data points and extrapolating out some of those. So we can question some of those sorts of things and know things from that context. But I also think we don't fall in so easily into the trap that I'm seeing a lot of the younger generation fall into, which is that the Gen AI tools can be very sycophantic. They want to please you, right? And so, you ask it to explain something to you, and it'll give you an answer um, that makes you think you understand what's going on, because it's pandering to you. And I think those of us who are a bit longer in the tooth, we tend to be a little more skeptical of things in general, because we've been through enough trauma of, hey, this system's going to solve all our problems, and
You've got the
right.
scars to prove it
We've
there,
got
Michael.
scars to prove it. And, I think we are in a very pivotal technology shift. But, I've been through those before. I came out of my PhD into the start of the dot-com boom, where, everybody was wanting people who knew something about e-commerce. Nobody knew much more than how to spell e-commerce, right? And yet when I started my PhD, there was no World Wide Web, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been through those sorts of things. People thought a few years ago blockchain was going to be one of those things, and now it sort of settles back into the toolkit of things that are there, but not quite as revolutionary. Now, AI is a big one, but it's not going to replace completely everything that we do, and it'll find its home. And there's reasons to be skeptical of where it will fall over and what its limits are, and thinking again, what do I bring as value as a human being to the equation of the professional work that I'm doing, and the value that the organization I'm working with is trying to create. And the AI can leverage that. The AI can make us potentially more efficient on that if we use it well. But I think at the end of the day, it's a human endeavor. It's human goals that we're trying to achieve. It's having impact on people. It's working with people. It's delivering value to people and organizations. And that comes from understanding and meaning making, which the AI doesn't do.
Well, one of the challenges I've got, and I'm interested in your view on that, is that people don't see governance as that important. So it's voluntary at the moment. And we've got an Australian standard for AI implementation. It was brought out by the Digital Transformation Agency, and it's only in use in the Australian public sector. Now, although they've recommended other industries adopt it, including academia, because it is going to be the universal standard. I expect it'll be the federal government will want everybody to be on the same page, right? In terms of how they're implementing AI. So at the moment, if people are going out there buying systems, implementing it without this knowledge that you're talking about, or the understanding of what they're trying to achieve, and well, the Wild West kind of attitude of let's just get it in and sort the rest out later. It's to unwind all that and put good governance around it is probably going to be quite significant. For one of those things around governance is making sure that the supplier of the technology allows you to be able to audit it. And does it explain things properly? Is it fully transparent? Can we, if something goes wrong, can we shut it down? And how do we go back to the old ways of working if it doesn't work? So what's going to create the shift in a patchwork of regulation right now that's going to start getting people to pay attention to AI governance?
Look, I think governance is, always seen as overhead and control, and people don't like that. Well, control stifles innovation. You're trying to stifle innovation. Yeah, there's a trade-off. We know the tighter the control, the less innovation, but you know that's a risk decision that the board level needs to be making. I think what's going to drive it is the economic imperative of some catastrophes, and in the work I've done in the past on risk scenario planning, one of the tricks you always do with risk scenario planning to get the board to pay attention to those issues is you create two news stories. One, this scenario happens and we weren't ready for it. The other, this scenario happens and we were ready for it. And when you create that news article that basically says, "Hey, look, we stuffed this up. We're on the front page of the AFR for the wrong reason," board
Yeah.
members start to get concerned and they act, right? And I think that's the sort of thing we'll still see some horror stories, but those horror stories will also motivate the governance. What we've got to be careful of is how we develop that governance and how we do that in the right way for the organisation, so it's consistent with the organisation's risk appetite set by the board, but also understands the context and relationships and environment that you're in, because a lot of this is going to have to be principles based and culture driven, because the technology keeps moving, and so tight rule-based policies don't quite work here. So the old hire smart people and enable them to thrive is going to be the continuing way that we've got to operate. But it also goes as you think about those sort of control mechanisms, it's being pragmatic about them as well. I was doing some work with one of the large financial institutions about 15 years ago, and senior executive was saying, "Yeah, we're about to roll out risk-adjusted performance measures." And I go, "What? We don't know how to measure performance real well. We certainly don't know how to measure risk real well. You're going to put the two together and attach a bonus to that? Doesn't that scare the living daylights out of you?" And he gets there and goes, "Yeah, it does, but it doesn't scare me as much as not trying to do it, because of what will happen if we don't try and at least get a handle on this in some way." And I think that's the pragmatic approach. So, can we get perfect governance of this? No. Does that mean we don't try and do some governance? No, we should do something, and we should be keeping that conversation happening, because that's how you build the culture, and thinking about the principles and how we do that. In some settings, you will be more locked down than others because of the nature of the task that you're getting the AI to do, the environment, the compliance requirements for transparency of what's going on will become increasingly important. But I think there's also growing opportunities for how we do this. This is where we start to separate out the vendors of these various tools and how they do help you in that. It'll go back to the basics of making sure you understand what your actual business process is before you start trying to put AI and implement in it. And, so often we don't map out processes well enough, and
Nor the data.
yeah, and they're so complicated and all over the place, and patchwork quilts. And there'll be roles for AI assurance, and I think AI assurance is going to be a growing field where, how confident am I that I'm using the right data and right model, and that I can trust in this setting that this is going to get me there most of the time. And it's also thinking about pragmatically what the outcomes are without AI. So, people have been talking for years about driverless cars, and people always get nervous. Well, but what happens when they kill someone? Who's responsible? And that's already happening. But how do they make the trade off? There's 3 school kids there. There's the grandmother's crossing the road. It's got to choose between which one it's it. How does it make that choice? Yeah, those are difficult choices to make. But the question isn't, will driverless cars kill somebody? They will. The question is, will less people be killed by cars if we have AI driving them than if we have humans driving them? And quite frankly, I can't wait for driverless cars to be ubiquitous, because I've driven on Victorian roads. And
Well, you've got to watch out for the potholes first, mate. If you can
yeah,
get past through the potholes,
well, that only makes it more exciting.
I think you'll be right. So there's been some very public PR issues with and caused by lack of governance. So recently, a rogue AI car rental software wiped out an entire production database and all of its backups in just 9 seconds. It went completely rogue. And the users were shut out of the system for days until the software could be recovered. So what do you think and feel when you hear those sort of headlines?
So I think a couple of things. One, AI is getting the blame because it's the new kid on the street. But hang on, how could the AI get access to the backups? Where don't you have offsite backups? All those sorts. If you're doing all your backups and all those other processes are right, then you're protected from the AI going rogue anyhow. So you didn't have your environment set up appropriately to constrain the AI going rogue, because if the AI could go rogue and do that, what was to stop a human being going rogue and doing that? And
Mm.
you should have the controls around that, both administrative and technological controls, to make that happen. So I think it's sometimes a bit rich to blame the AI. The AI was just the thing that actually executed on that, but the weaknesses were already there, and it's exposing new latent weaknesses. And so I think we need to think about that element of what's going on. I mean, where we're seeing this very much now is things like cybersecurity, right? Because the cybersecurity weaknesses profile hasn't changed dramatically, but with tools like Mythos floating around and AI coming there to driving the attacks. Cybersecurity, everybody's getting much more cautious about because of the attacks that are coming, because the attacker has become more powerful. But they're still attacking weaknesses that were already there. If there's no weakness there, you patch the weakness. A more sophisticated attack doesn't penetrate it.
So, tell us about how you're using AI with your PhD students. What difference is that making to how someone is studying these days?
So to the extent that we used to be developing program code to do data science work, we're now getting AI to develop the program code. And it's why you see sort of data science roles are disappearing, and everybody's in the data science space is becoming AI engineers, because they're putting together packages of things and orchestrating that to produce the results. It's opening up new data sources for us to be able to analyze large lots of text in interesting ways. So we're running now on the research computing platform at the university. I have a virtual machine there that runs our own Gen AI server that we do calls through, that we, here are, 10,000 financial reports that we're analyzing, something about, a new leasing standard or new details about how intangibles are being disclosed. You go analyze these disclosures to a conceptual schema that we've developed, bang, away you go, right? So it's allowing us to do different things. It's also changing the nature of the work. So, yes, AI can write documents for us, but it can also read the documents for you. So if anything that I send out now, I get AI to proofread it, right? So I'd put together a PowerPoint deck. I'll get AI to read the PowerPoint deck, and it'll say, hey, you've got a typo here, you've got things here. This one's a little bit too, text heavy. And if you prompt it the right way, you can refine all those things. So it's changing the workflows. It will make us more efficient, but it's also raising the quality bar of what we're doing, because the tools can do a pretty good job of some of those ordinary Lego blocks, which gets us back to thinking the hard part, sort of where we started, about coming up with the right question, thinking
Mm.
about who we are as human beings and how we connect that to real world contexts that matter and have impact, and solving important problems in ways that are going to make the world a better place. These are just new bits of armor and weapons in our toolkit to be able to do that. But we still got to go engage with organisations, understand their context, understand the pragmatics of what's happening and how these things are rolling out, to be able to understand and develop and create the impacts that we want and the successes that we want here. So
So what about
it's
the
exciting, but scary too. Yeah.
but what about your research articles, right? You want to read on a topic, you want to read 5,000 documents that are on this particular topic from a research perspective. A human couldn't possibly get through all that. And how quickly can you get through 5,000 documents to
So I don't read the 5,000, but already I had, been doing this for long enough. I've got filtering mechanisms. I can pick up an academic paper in my area and in 5 minutes tell you whether it's any good or crap. And
yeah,
as a journal editor, that's what I do. And so, we in the journal that I edit, we do what we call an editor-in-chief rapid review process. And so we'll get a paper and we'll turn around on that paper very quickly because we're getting lots of submissions, papers, before it even goes out to the peer review process. We've done a quick review on it, and and so we're doing a lot of what we call desk rejects, so it doesn't get past our shield because we can look at it very quickly. And I use AI to assist in that. I don't get AI to do the review because I can skim the paper and know. But what I get AI to do is to document my ideas to AI. These are the 3 problems, and then I get AI to format that into a nice, more positive and constructive response rather than saying, "God, this is dumb what they've done here," right? Because I can sometimes be a little too blunt. So you can soften your messaging, and I think that's where it really can help. But it doesn't take away the expertise I've got, because not only do I know the literature and the papers and what's going on in practice, but I know the story as it's unfolding, right? And I know the reasons, the causal things. Whereas I'm looking at data, I'm looking only at correlations, right? That's what you're looking at in the data that the AI is producing. It doesn't know what the cause is; it only sees correlations. And if you start to look at what's correlated in data, sometimes things that are weirdly correlated come out. I mean, one of my favorite examples of this, because I'm a sci-fi person and like space things. So if you look at the data over the last 50 years of the US government's expenditure on NASA, it is unsurprisingly gone down, but it is statistically significantly negatively correlated with an increasing suicide rate in the US. So there's a correlation. Is there a causation? Probably not, right? But, that's an example of, we've got lots of things that correlate that aren't causally related. And that's the storytelling part that still comes into play. I know where the papers are published. I know the people who are writing those papers. I know the perspectives and biases they come and how to interpret those as well. And I'm constantly thinking and working through the messaging and storying on the work that I'm doing, seeing what's happening with that phenomena in an organization, now, today, not what was, even published in an early online or mentioned at a conference 3 weeks ago. It's being in touch with the reality. And I think there's no substitute for the human getting out there and getting in touch with the reality of the phenomena they're studying or the world that they're trying to problem solve in. And I go back to the great example that I was reading about as a PhD student in the 1990s about the technology of nuclear reactors. And, there you've got to have, the technology has to work. Otherwise people will die at scale if you get a bad meltdown. We've seen that happen. And you've seen the rooms with all the dials and the info they get. But you talk to the engineers, and what they found out, those nuclear scientists and engineers like to go walking around the plant to listen to the noises it's making, see what's going on, see where there's steam or other things going on, smells, all that full experience in touch with it, because otherwise everything's mediated through the technology, right? And sometimes that part is really crucial to get that on the ground understanding of how it works and have your intuition about how it works and what's going on. So you're not just driven by, well, but all the dials are in green, so we're okay, aren't we? Boom, right? We have organizational equivalents on that. So it's the old, management by walking around type of thing. If you're just looking at all the reporting things that are coming up in the organization and getting the AI to analyze those, you're going to miss that. Now, the AI can help. Let's get AI at the back end. You could get it coding up all your email correspondence in your organization. You could do that to get a sense of what's the sentiment in the organization. Is everybody, but I'd also say if you're doing something like that, you've probably not got a good sentiment in the organization because you're creating a controlling environment.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll tell you a bit about a project I did for an automation of finance, which would be
Mm.
right in your sweet spot.
Yep.
So the organisation had 50,000 invoices that were being processed pretty much manually. Now, procurement was completely decentralised, so everybody did their own thing in terms of how they bought stuff and how they interacted with suppliers, including the preferred supplier. So
Mm,
we had a tool that would read the invoices, and
mm.
you had to teach it first, though.
Yep, yep.
We had to how to code it and it would remember, and then continue refining and refining. Eventually, the machine would take up. And so when we did our preferred suppliers first, we got through 50% of the invoices just for preferred suppliers. There might have been 3 or 400 of them, and we got our pay on time rate from 57% up to 92%. So that's the
Mm,
power of it. And because we were dealing with one supplier, we could work with them directly. Hey, we need this information on the invoice. We need this change, blah, blah, blah. And we got it. We got really good results. Then we got to the messiness where you had a lawnmower person up in Echuca who was mowing the lawns, gives them a paper invoice. And then you would have another Sparky over there in Melton who was, every invoice would be different, So
mhm, mhm.
the actual process of how they've procured that Sparky and how they're set up in the system and how they invoice, we ended up with, 1,500 different ways that people were working across 180 to 200 sites. So everybody was special because it was their site. They wanted to do it their own way, but we were trying to, as you said, deterministic, creating a structured process. So that's when we got to the messiness of the process. So no one had ever done that big overall sweep and say, right, this is how we're going to do procurement. This is how we're going to engage with suppliers. Everybody was allowed to do their own thing and of course, when you bring in structure that people go, well, I'm losing control of this now, so then it's being centralized. But one of the observations was that the people in finance, their role went from data entry to data review. So the machine did all the heavy lifting. They just had to review that. And I found that was a really difficult thing for people to get their head around. It's no longer keying in 8 hours a day. They've actually got to see what the output is and tick and tie that to make sure it's correct. And some people really struggled with just that change of their role and the change of their cognitive process.
Yeah.
And I suspect that would be everywhere because people have been doing data entry for 15 years. All of a sudden, they've got to think differently about the same problem. Have you seen that in the university?
Yeah, I'll probably avoid talking about the university because
Yeah.
I'll end up venting a little too much. We just
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah,
generally,
generally,
it
we,
it's a problem. Yeah, it's a
yeah.
problem. And look, I've done some work a few years ago on a project for CPA Australia looking at rollout of RPA in finance functions. And it was interesting. There's a lot of resistance in the different organizations we spoke to start with until people could see that, so this is going to take the 80% of my job that's really boring and let me do the interesting, more value add. But there was also those people who say, but this is just a job for me.
Yeah.
And I want to
Yeah.
keep it simple. I'm not here for intellectual stimulation. I'm not here this is to put food on the table. End of story, right? And so I think it will change the nature of that sort of workforce. I've been told by so many people so often that AI is going to replace accountants, and I say no, no, no. It will replace bookkeeping and clerical work even more than what we've already seen over the last 30 or 40 years. But those who are what I would call a thinking accountant, reasoning and storytelling that aren't going to be replaced. And it's the meaning making, it's the review processes, it's understanding what's going on. It's not the processing work. So
Mm.
it's the intellectual work that we're going to focus on that is always going to be where the value add is. What that means for others in the workforce who are resisting that, I think that's a challenge. And I don't know what the new jobs will be for them, but it's also, we need to be really careful because in a lot of cases, those people, and I think we saw this in COVID, were the glue that kept processes working together because the processes that we have often don't function perfectly. And it's the human being that glues them together and makes it happen by filling in the gaps. Oh, that was missing off that invoice. So I just called Joe to get the
Yeah.
and
Yep.
we saw a lot of that disappear in COVID, where people were all work from home, and so you didn't have that chatter across the cubicle farm about, hey, what's going on with this? To deal with the handoffs and breakdowns in processes. But again, that's just highlighting the problem with the processes and keeping that on the ground insight in going on. But I think that it won't happen as fast as we think it will, right? I mean, you and I are similar age. You remember the 1980s, they were talking about the paperless office, right? Great, fabulous. Technology, computers are rolling out, the PC is here, we're going to have a paperless office. Yeah, it was only about 18 months ago, we got an email out from the Vice-Chancellor disappointed that the university had failed to meet its target for reducing paper consumption in the university. And let me just say, having been in the sector for a long time, I know how much we consume because I've seen the face of the lead rep from Xerox come out to the university to see what we were doing with the latest technology when I was in New York. And he said, "Oh, you can't treat these things as badly as what we do back at the office," and then plugs in to see what we've been doing with this new test machine. He goes, my God, because the line I used to say is, you want to save a forest, just kill an academic, right? Because we're generating so much paper. Paper is still there, obviously a lot less, but that's been 40 years we've been on that journey of the paperless office, and we still see things coming on paper. So getting those processes right, and the business is going to keep changing, the processes are going to keep changing. You'd think, if we take a big example like banks, surely they're technology central to what they do. They're getting rid of tellers. Their processes have to be, really tightly. No, they're not. So one of my past PhD students who just graduated last year is what I call one of my bucket listers. So he's older than what I am. He'd spent 20 years as head of global payments at NAB and ANZ and knew everybody in the sector. And we looked at business process compliance. And in one situation we had in the sector, 60,000 payment transactions, 53,000 transactions going through unique pathways through the business process on what was a stock standard payment process. And so you sit there and say there is so much variation. And he got interested in this because as the role he was in, he was having to sign off, are we compliant with anti-money laundering and all those sort of things? He says, I can't say that we can easily because the process is so messy. We don't have the data, and we're getting process mining tools and things like that help. But the problems are just going to morph into different forms, and we're constantly revising our processes anyhow. And that's I think what you see with this automation is it's not automating what we're doing, it's changing what the process is. And when we did that work for CPA on robotic process automation, every organisation we went to redesigned their business processes as part of the rollout of UpHead, except in one setting. And that one setting was fast-moving consumer goods. So think supermarkets and those sorts of things. Why? Because they are running on such razor-thin margins that efficiency is so crucial to them. They are constantly refining and updating their processes. So it wasn't like they had to do it so they could do RPA. They were always refining the process because if they shave off half a cent off a transaction that they do 1 million times, that's where they're making them.
Yeah, well, you've actually made a really good point because the project I did last year, when I got to the second half of the invoices, that's where the humans got involved. So they filled in gaps, they plugged holes, they just pushed it through because we'll fix it next time, but they never did. So there was that going on. There was also that concept of, I don't want to think too much. I'm just happy, got a good bunch of people around me, and just happy to process invoices all day. I'm happy to do that, and that's all I want to do. So they're disincentivized, I guess, to change the process because it feels like they're part of it and gives them a role in the process. So it was amazing once we found out what things were happening and going directly to that person and not going into the central queue, what they should have been doing. It had no visibility on it. So as a manager, you're managing, disparate processes of a very well-known age-old function of processing invoices could have that much variation in and not have the visibility over what in fact was going on. And so AI will sort all that out. It will bring to the surface those things that you weren't aware. Well, look, where did that come from? That's come out of left field. Oh, it's been going to Michelle's inbox for the last 15 years, but she's been processing it directly herself, but it's not part of the formal queue. She's been doing it as a favour to somebody up in Shepparton.
Yep.
So all that stuff comes out. So that's the big change, isn't it? It's not so much the process itself, it's getting aligned to the way the new world's going to work, both from a human perspective and a technology's perspective.
And getting the visibility of those things is where the power, I think, comes through, because we're actually using this to drive better business processes. And
Mm,
it also means that the people who are involved in executing those processes need to understand why we want them to do that a particular way, because of how it generates information for management decision making. Because I've done some work in organizations where, we went out to the field site for this organisation. We were going to be doing a project in one particular direction, and it's like, I like to understand the context really well. So we just sat as a fly on a wall at a frontline franchise operation and watched what they did for the day. And in their routine transaction processing, they did something that my co-author and I just turned to each other and go, "What in God's name are they? What?" I can still visualize the taxi ride home from that one where we're saying,
mm,
"Look, this project has now changed. I want to understand why they thought that was rational to do, because that was the dumbest thing I've ever seen someone do with a system." And then,
mm,
then we got in and found out it was because it was a workaround, because there was a weakness in the system that made it
yep.
cumbersome for them at an operational level. It completely destroyed the data for management decision making and what they were
Mm,
doing. And so we then ended up exploring that organisation, documenting a whole lot of other ones to try and understand that. And it just shows you how we don't want to have anybody in the organisation who's sitting there essentially being a human robot. They need to understand
mm,
the meaning of what they are doing. And it also goes to your point about, if we put the technology in, what happens if it falls over, right? Do we have
mm,
someone who actually understands how the process works manually? Because if nobody has that knowledge, we're in trouble. We're creating a dependency. And those sort of technological dependencies are the things that make me very scared, because that's the sort of thing that can kill an organization very quickly. We've seen it at the university sector globally in the last week, because we've become dependent on largely one major vendor for our learning management systems that provide the web pages that have all the materials that support our teaching. Canvas cyber attack and went down globally for 3 or 4 days. We're back up now at Melbourne, but that was just a nightmare, because that was our channel for talking with students. That's the way they delivered their assignments. That's where we delivered the assessment. Gone. And it wasn't us, it was a global problem. And
mm,
so,
mm.
some of my junior colleagues can't remember the time where you'd get handed the paper as assignment physically by the student. You would go to
I do.
the room, and yes, I've written on a blackboard with chalk, or the sophisticated technology was the plastic transparency for the overhead. But the principles don't change. The ideas are what you're doing. And I think that's where we lose things sometimes, when we get too caught up in the technology. Back to that first point about what's the problem or question we're trying to answer
Mm,
here. And technology is always going to be part of the solution, because it can help us so much. But if you haven't defined the attributes of the problem correctly, and if you take your invoicing example, so is there a reason that I need that particular lawnmower guy from Echuca to be the lawnmower guy, right? Is there a strategic reason why I want that person? Well, then maybe we'll allow that as the exception for some reason, because of something that's there. Now, it may not be for a lawnmower, but maybe another reason why we do that. That is also part of how we, you know, function at a local level to ensure that we're not running a big centralized beast that standardizes everything, and therefore creates opportunities for someone to come in and pursue a local solution that is more
mm,
customized, and compete with the big player, because the big players tend to have that problem of lacking in agility and change and personalization of what they're doing. I know in the organizations that I work with, in terms of my own financial affairs, I'm looking for professionals that want a relationship with me. I assume the technology and their expertise are going to be okay. That's the relationship they want with me. So they're thinking about me as a customer, not me as the one who's just paying an invoice for them.
So one of the things I've noticed on your LinkedIn profile is the neurodivergent status. So take me through that. How does that show up, and how does
So
that give you a superpower?
yeah, so like most of my people my age, I got the discovery that I was autistic when my son got diagnosed in high school. And we knew there was something there. We couldn't pin it with him, but we finally got him diagnosed. My daughter is similarly, and we're all different and unique in different ways. For me, that's manifested. So I've got autism, what we would probably call autism level 1, although, it's a spectrum. People have different varieties of how that manifests. So it's, the line is, you met one person with autism, you met one person with autism, is an
Mm.
important thing to bear in mind. How's that manifested for me? Well, in some respects, it should have been bleedingly obvious. What am I? I'm a professor of accounting and IT. So I'm in the academic in IT and account. Could you get more nerdy than that? So I suppose in that regard, it was there, but what I have seen and how I reflect on that, it allows me to have great pattern recognition things. So I had a colleague, even before I was diagnosed, that I've known for a long time, say to me on the research side, "You see connections and linkages between things that other people don't." Right,
Mm.
and he was a really smart guy.
Like the
Uh,
sixth sense.
yeah, and it's like, wow, yeah, wow, you really understand how I see the world. But I now know that's my autistic pattern matching. The eclectic range of things that I do. So I've done everything from, you know, hardcore technology things, programming
Mm.
code, hardware things. I know what it's like when you rewire hardware incorrectly and blow the chip apart. Done that. Through to, hardcore financial reporting, presenting things to international standard setters on accounting policy things. So that variety of things, I think, is my ADHD, always looking for something
Mm.
novel and very interest focused. So those are the strengths that give me the boundary spanning and the pattern matching. The challenges are that you've got to build the right routine structures. I'm not good at organizing time, and I tend to be blunt sometimes in communications. So, I am using AI a lot now, and that's a Copilot. If I'm sending an important email, I'll run that through Copilot to sanitize it, to make sure that I've not inadvertently said something that was going to be misinterpreted or too blunt or rude when I don't intend to be. I'm just stating the facts. But sometimes stating the facts is telling the emperor they're not wearing any clothes, and there's some subtlety in doing that. So I've been labelled in the past as combative and uncompromising, right? Um,
Oh, haven't we all?
yeah, and that's manifested from the autism that really
Yeah.
drives that. So that's where that's come from, but also then leveraging the AI to deal with the executive function and the technology. So one of the ADHD things that you find is ADHD people are crisis motivated and interest motivated, not consequence motivated, which means that, if we take the Douglas Adams thing, because I think he was a bit neurodiverse, he had this lovely line. He says, "I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they pass me by." But that led his creativity. So, if you're familiar in the audience with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the role of the towel, that's because he
Yeah.
used to procrastinate in the bath when he was writing.
Mm.
That was how the bath towel became a central feature of what he was doing. I have that same issue. So I now have a smartwatch that vibrates on my arm every 15 minutes just to say to me as a physical reminder, are you focused? Are you on time? I take advantage of technology tools like the Microsoft booking page has been a godsend to sort of arrange meetings. I'm not doing emails backwards and forth because I'm terrible at being responsive on emails. If you don't get a response from me straight away, it could be 3 weeks or never for that reason, because I've just got so many things going on in where it is. So it brings some strengths, it brings some challenges. And I think, it's a struggle. I'm been fortunate that I've been able to get to a place and a role that those strengths allow me to take advantage of
Indeed.
those. But I also see, with my own kids and with others that I know who are challenged. I know others in academia who are struggling because they don't fit the mold of something,
Mm.
and particularly in a much more compliance world we have. You got to tick the boxes. You don't tick the boxes, you're in trouble. I'm doing some work with a junior colleague on autistic leadership. And so we're going around interviewing people in leadership roles who are autistic about how they are functioning, how they're thriving, and the challenges that they've faced. And some of the interesting things that we're seeing there is that downwards management, great, because they really care about enabling other people. They care about the principles and clarity and making things work better. Upwards management, not so good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Um,
all about the human connection.
yeah, and it's also that pattern recognition means they see things before others do. And
Mm.
some of the ones we've been dealing with have learnt, and I'm still trying to learn this, really good ways of sort of laying the breadcrumbs to get people to see the pattern. Whereas I've had, people I've worked with saying, yeah, I know, Michael, you don't want evolution, you want revolution, because I want the change now, because I can see,
No,
see where it's going.
I know your pace and my pace is probably too quick for
Yeah.
a
And
lot of
so
organisations.
you get that thing where people say to
Yeah.
you 5 years later, oh, yeah, you were right about that. No, and I've seen it in so many things.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shame, really, because we see the world differently.
Mm,
Some people in IT, and I've seen those kinds of people that end up as database administrators or system admin because they're so meticulous with the detail,
yeah.
particularly in ERP, that they wrap their arms around something and they protect it with their life. And for those very highly structured systems like SAP, Technology One, there's always somebody in that role that guards it within an inch of its life. And that's great. We
Yeah.
want those people protecting our data,
Yep.
but
Yep.
they can be seen as abrasive and inflexible. And
Yep.
that's the
Yep.
shame of the
Ah,
whole.
we had someone I worked with who was an event manager for us, and they were on the spectrum. They sometimes could be a little abrasive with some senior staff who got upset about that, but they were a fantastic event manager because they thought about what could go wrong at that event 10 levels beyond what everybody could.
Well,
So they had
if
all the
you
backups in place. They're
But
great
if you,
managers.
but when people present a project to an IT person who knows that what's happened in the past, and you go through all the things that could go wrong, it's stop being so negative. Just get on with it, and it makes it really hard for for people who are detail oriented. Because I walked into an organisation, and I said to the CEO, I said, I will just run some quick reports. I'll have a wander around, talk to some people, and by lunchtime, I reckon I could save you 100 grand. So I did that. I got a report from their billing system, and I got a report from their payroll, and I looked at the hours to compare how many hours they'd billed and how many hours that they'd paid, and I found 100 grand
Yeah.
straight up. And all of a sudden, people got nervous because I'm finding things that people don't want to be found, and it made it really it made people uncomfortable when you do these things as a consultant, and the CEO, he actually didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And then you look at this and go, well, why do you need me? Because I'm helping you improve and become more sustainable, but you're not prepared to make the change that's needed. People issues always got in the way. So yeah, they had debts piling high. This was an NDIS provider,
Yeah.
and they didn't understand the concept of debt collection. So I had a look at that process, and they'd call someone back after 6 months if they hadn't paid. And well, that's their plan and run out of money, right? They
Yeah.
couldn't get the money. So losing money hand over fist, but there was not this urgency and we'll be okay. And they went broke. They went out of business. None of this stuff matters to them.
I think it's a broader problem.
Yeah.
People tend to be risk resistant to change, and I
Yeah.
think people in technology realms, we're used to change all the time because the technology is always updating. And a good business technologist is someone who's boundary spanning, so we're able to see the impacts and do that translation across. But it's a rare vision that we get because we're seeing what the technology can and can't do. We're seeing how it will impact the business, and they're still thinking we'll keep doing this the way we're doing this. And
Mm.
you know, we know that doesn't bear out. I mean, one of the most interesting studies a colleague of mine when I was at NYU in marketing did, he looked at the companies behind the big brands, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then looked at where those companies were and the companies that were behind the big brands in the late 1900s, early 2000s. And what happened? Well, most of the companies that were household brand name and with their products didn't exist by the 1990s. So, fast forward 50, 100 years, they're gone. What were the
Mm.
two exceptions? Coca-Cola, which is a unique, we know, in branding land, and General Electric. And General Electric
Mm.
today is nothing like what General Electric was
Yeah.
originally. It's a much more diverse business. In other words, it changed, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so it's understanding that change and recognizing that change is something you're always going to have to do. And that's where we've actually seen in some of the other work on it, back to sort of governance side, one of my other bucket listers, or as he prefers, Grey Panther. Stu Black was a retired Deloitte partner working in analytics. He now works as an enterprise fellow with me as co-editor on the Australasian Journal of Information Systems. Did a PhD with me on data governance, and he interviewed board members of listed Australian companies to try and understand whether they saw secondary use of data as a critical enabler of the business and strategy, or whether it was, something that, that's risky, we don't want to touch, that sort of thing. And we thought coming in that, you've got to have a digital native on the board that can see what the technology possibilities are. Yeah, that was there. But what was really more important was that the board had an active mindset. They weren't happy with the status quo. In other words, they knew they had to keep adapting and changing. And those were the ones who could leverage this data asset and turn it into an enabler of new strategy and strategic initiatives, and develop value out of it and manage the risks with it appropriately. And I think that's the key thing, is that for me is we've got to keep learning, we've got to keep adapting and changing. And AI is just the latest part of that. Governance is the sort of balancing mechanism, that how we think about the risk benefit trade-off when we're making that change. And like any risk benefit trade-off, sometimes that needs to be a detailed workup with a very hefty bit of policy and control systems put in place. And sometimes it's a back of the envelope, back of the napkin judgment, and let's go, go, go. And the smart people are the ones who know which one's the back of the napkin and which is the ones, no, we've got to really do our homework and get this right, otherwise we're dead, right?
Perfect. Yeah, we've got we've just, this change will be huge. And for the people that are resistant to change, it's coming anyway.
Yeah.
You won't be able to fight it.
Well, it's like those Aussie companies with household brand names. It's change or die. It's change or die. And yeah, that's what I've spent my career doing. While I've managed to do that essentially in, in one style of organization, the sort of work I've done, it's changed dramatically over the last 30 years. That if you told me I would be doing what I'm doing now on some things 5 years ago, I would have laughed at you. My colleagues said, "Oh, that's not what Michael does," but that's what I'm doing now, because the world has moved and I've changed, and it's not the
But
AI stuff that's the new part.
so what advice would you give to your younger self then?
Yeah, buckle in, baby, because it's a hell of a ride. I don't think, 18-year-old me would not have predicted that my life would have turned out in so many different ways. I grew up in Launceston. I'd lived in the same house for the first 18 years of my life. I didn't have a big travel bug, as I wasn't looking to move. 18 was the year that I first dated my wife. We broke up, but we ended up getting back together and have now been married for 34 and a half years. So, if you ask 18-year-old me what's going to happen, where he's going to go, wouldn't I? You'll live 10 years in the US. You'll live in an apartment in New York City. You'll travel the world. You'll do 35 trips to Malaysia doing an exec ed program on financial management and strategy with Petronas. You'll be, supervising PhDs in AI and financial reporting and risk management and all these different areas. Couldn't imagine. It's exciting. It's scary. It's a roller coaster. You take each day as it comes and live in the moment as best you can and enjoy the journey. Enjoy the journey and be human.
Great advice.
Yeah.
I've got one more book that I like. This is my second favorite book. I don't know if you can read that.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Very
Now,
much so.
now
Very much so.
what you need to do is to pick a number between 1 and 100, and I'll open to that page.
Why don't we do 57? That's my age.
In school, you're taught the lesson and then you're given the test. In life, you're given a test that teaches you a lesson.
So true. So true. I mean, obviously I believe in the value of education, but I also don't discount experience. And an individual who is on the board of an organization and was working with tells the story of the introductions going around the room and everyone's talking about their qualifications. And he comes to him and he looks there solemnly and says, "I have a QBE." And everybody goes, "What the hell is a QBE?" He goes, "Qualified by experience." And, yep, you can learn lots, and we're creating vicarious experiences a lot in what we do in the university environment, but also getting engagement with practice and, going out in the industry, seeing what the real problems are, seeing those issues is crucial. And putting those two together is how you survive and thrive. And in whatever you're doing, it's it's learning and changing. I mean, I know people who've got 20 years experience in fields who are doing the same thing the same way they've done for 20 years and they're not learning. I know people who've been in a role for 6 months and walked away with 10 years worth of vicarious experience from doing that still shapes what they're doing 30 years later, right?
Yeah. So
That learning approach in what you do and buckle in and enjoy the roller coaster ride.
Well, Douglas Adams wrote in his book, you know what a learning experience is? A learning experience is one of those things that says, you know that thing you just did? Well, don't do that.
Well, in teaching our PhD students, I do a research methods boot camp, and one of my opening lines of that is, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research.
I love it. So
Yeah.
how do people get in touch with you, Michael, if they want to know more or
LinkedIn or email is fine. LinkedIn's
Yep.
pretty good to connect
Yeah.
up, and email. Yep. Just Google my name, you'll find me.
Yeah. All right. And what's coming up for you? What's next?
So I'm actually on sabbatical in second half of the year, and I'll be the inaugural professor in residence at CPA Australia, working with their thought leadership team in policy and advocacy on technology and accounting and business related projects to try and drive things forward and develop the professionals of the future, and working on some projects with some colleagues at RMIT, and continue to work with my PhD students, doing lots of exciting things and continuing my work with the industry on the executive front. So I do a program with the Defence Science Technology Group scientists on helping them make business cases for the R&D work that they're doing and things like that. So lots of exciting real world problem solving and impactful things. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, you'll need to find some time to sleep.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to Michael Davern on The Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, a podcast for anyone trying to make sense of intelligent machines, messy politics, and everything in between. So thank you again, Michael. And I'm sure we'll have you on again after your sabbatical, because we'd like to go in a few deeper to get your insights from the land of academia. And good luck with your sabbatical.
Thanks very much. Always good to talk, Bruce.